All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midwestern Marks. My name is Eddie Smith here with my comrade and colleague Carlos Garrido. Here we want to film a video with our tips for new and up and coming leftists, and we're going to talk about gatekeeping, the importance of looking at sources outside the West and your own intellectual development, and then just how to develop reading theory and getting smarter about economics, political economy, politics, everything, philosophy, all the stuff we talk about. So you want to go ahead, Carlos, start it off?
Yeah, just from the experience of the last video, I feel like your the way you said tips sounded like tits. So we're definitely gonna have one of those comments that refers back to the minute and puts a dirty link under it. But yeah, so I think we should start talking with about personal development. Um, so one of the things that I remembered that was one of the biggest issues that I had to overcome when I started reading theory was waiting for the perfect moment to read theory. I felt like every time I read a book, I had to remember everything that was in it, every single argument, and that every time I read, I took notes that were basically like equivalent to the amount of stuff that I read. It was ridiculous. So I found myself in a predicament of always waiting for the right time to read. And one of the things that helped me develop the most was to realize um, that I can't do that, because if I do that, then I might have 2, 3, maybe 4 days in a week where I feel like, okay, this is the perfect time to just sit down and read and crank out maybe 30 pages. But one of the things that I've noticed that has helped me develop um, has been not waiting for this moment of the perfect time to read. There really isn't a perfect time to read. Whenever you can sit down and you have 5 minutes, 10, 15, and you can crank out some pages, you'll realize that you'll get a lot more information in. And at the end of the day, you'll be working with 75, 100, 120 pages being read, basically reading books every day or every 2 days without having to have that strenuous effort of sitting down and reading for 2 hours straight or something like that. So that's the first thing, and connected to that, just realizing that you don't have to memorize all the arguments. Uh, just memorize the essences of what you're getting, and if you're working with it's a physical text that you can mark up, you're always going to be able to return to it. Um, and and if you think about it like that, you're always going to remember stuff. Like I, every once in a while a topic will come up and I'll be like, oh, from this text, this chapter, this and that, it says this, and it's, um, don't aim for that. Aim to read the book and to understand the main points that are in the text, but don't aim to have an encyclopedic mind. Just aim to understand what you're reading, and then you can always refer back to it. And remembering is a lot easier than learning. So just that would be my first tip for personal development. Just never wait. Don't be waiting for that perfect time. Just grab a book and read, and don't limit yourself either to just socialist theory. One of the things that Lenin says is in his 1920 speech to the young communist leagues, it's, if you just read socialist theory, you're going to be a fool. Like, read everything. We have all of this knowledge that has been accumulated by humanity. Use it, develop your mind. And that's, I think, what proletarian culture is all about: being able to not just do the things with your hands, but to have a sort of development um, that helps you qualitatively grow as a human being. When If anyone who's watching this has visited Cuba, you'd see that there's people that are doing manual labor that you'd ask them about the French Revolution, and they'd be able to explain it to you as good as historians in the U.S. Because that's just the proletarian culture of having not just a development in mental labor, but also in physical labor. So um, yeah, those would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, to add to that, just like pick up something and start reading. There's a lot of people who ask me, what should I start with? What's the best beginner book? And they're nervous to start getting into it. Like, just pick something up and go. Like, pick up, don't start with Capital. That's kind of what I did. You're going to be really confused for a while. Start with like Wage, Labor, and Capital, Value, Price, and Profit. Utopian Scientific, Imperialism by Lenin, one of the classics like that anybody will tell you to start with, and it's immediately going to blow your mind because you live in a capitalist system that's inherently contradictory, and your whole life you've been told that this is just the best system and you just have to shut up and be okay with it. And then all of a sudden you discover this whole world of theory of people saying, no, the system is inherently broken. In fact, we've got a path and a plan to build something much better and much less exploitative and much more based in the development of humanity. So whatever you start reading, it's going to blow your mind. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, why is this hidden from everybody? And then you realize it's because it's dangerous to the ruling class. It truly gives a path for class struggle and a scientific method for creating a better society, a society that works for the benefit of the masses rather than for the privileged few who happen to own the means of production. So like Carlos said, just pick up and start reading. Like we've got the Imperialism reading guide on our YouTube channel. It's a really short book, and those videos are short. Just start going, and then that can lead us into our next point. Do not worry about the gatekeepers or the people who judge you for not having previously read as much theory as them. The people who tell you read theory or shut up. Those people, one, they don't know what Marxism is about. Two, once you've read more Marx and more theory, you'll realize usually they don't even know what they're talking about. They just like being condescending and feeling smarter than people. And I forgot what three was, but those people are assholes. That's three. Just ignore. I mean, there's a huge strand on the left of academic leftists and people who are only in it for I don't know. I honestly don't even know what they're in it for. Just feeling smarter than other people. But if you're interested in actually changing the world and actually building a movement, a mass movement of people, stay away from those people, ignore them. Find yourself a good group of people who are going to aid and assist you in your development, because discourse and talking about this with other like-minded people is absolutely essential. If you're just reading it by yourself, you're going to be screwed. And I had Carlos for that, our professor, Dr. Dar, and our buddy Alex, who guided me through my development. And they were never judgmental. It was always, you guys just knew I wasn't I hadn't done the readings that you had. So you were helping me understand the readings that you had already done as you enhance your own knowledge. And then now I'm doing that with our up and comers in the labor club at our college, our buddies Brock and Matt. I'm helping them read theory, guiding them, the same thing that Carlos and Alex did to me. And then we've got Thomas Riggins on our site, who's been doing this for 40 years, and he's got a vast wealth of knowledge that just dwarfs mine and Carlos, because it wouldn't be physically possible for us to have studied as much as him because he's been alive for that long. Point being, everybody's on their own journey, in their own path, and their own personal intellectual development. And our job and our disposition, I guess, is to help people with that and to help them learn more and to bring them in and to make it as easy as possible. And I just can't stand these gatekeeping people I see on TikTok. I mean, it's mostly probably like 17 or 18-year-olds, but they don't understand what Marxism is about, honestly. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the points you touched on being able to learn through discourse and through like collective learning. That's so important, dude. Right? I'm taking a seminar right now on phenomenology, and I had never studied phenomenology before. I would read the text now at the beginning of the class, and I get what the text is saying, but when you go to the seminar and you're able to discuss with fellow students and with the professor, it just sticks, right? It solidifies what you read. So that's another thing. If you have people around you that you can talk to, even if it's just like, I know a lot of people who watch us are young. If you could just bug your parents and be like, hey, mom, let me talk to you about Lenin real quick, right? And just pretend like you're engaging in conversation. But understand things in your own way, right? And use it. And in practice and in using what you're learning in dialogue, that's where it's really going to stick.
Yes, I agree. My dad was just telling me the other day he would read Shakespeare in class at Lois, actually, with Professor Augie, our buddy, and he was like, I liked it. And then after the class, I'm like, oh, I'll read Shakespeare. And he got a book and he started reading it by himself. And he's like, oh, I don't understand it and I'm not having fun. He never picked it up again because he didn't have people to explain things he didn't know, people to discuss the text with. And I think we experienced that. We both took an eco-socialism class together, and like it was basically the whole class was you and me talking, but and our one other friend, but everything from that class stuck super well because of the discourse we had with us and our Marxist professor. So yeah, definitely need to lean on other people and engage in discourse, and then talk with people who are smarter than you, basically.
As far as gatekeeping, wow. Um, there's like two perspectives to it. There's like the ones that do it because they don't want deviations, and that's understandable. Like, you don't want things to stray so far where not even the ends and the means of that you're proposing or even fall in line, right? But even there, you should engage in discourse with those people because you don't know if maybe a book you recommend the book and that changed their lives, right? Like I remember I was going down like an anarchist path, and I started reading Parenti, and that changed me, and I then eventually was reading Marx. But I and that's like the development that we've tried to have with a lot of the labor club kids that we've been working with. But there's this sort of dialectical relationships between deviations. Some are worth having along and continuing to discuss. Some are, you should still discuss, but like if you're doing like a project like us, we don't want to be promoting certain perspectives that are just too far off what our aims are. But yeah, gatekeeping as like, oh, you haven't read this, so back off, or you don't know enough. That's shallow, that's immature, and like you said, the people that are usually doing that are probably younger people that have maybe read two or three things concerning the topic, and their ego is boosted. That's another thing. Lose your ego. You can't be a communist with this massive ego. You have to be humble. You have to want to work together and have your I can explain it with an example. I saw a video that I think was from the epoch of the Cultural Revolution in China, where an academic says that he was having this program where he was working with laborers. And one of the things that he was talking about was that when laborers partake in making something, they're not like putting their names on it, on each part that they made, right? Even though that's their creative activity, um, the collective mentality that is in work is completely different to like the academic mentality that you find in academia. So the the point is that don't like lose your ego. Like make your growth a growth that is one that also includes those around you and that actually has an impact in the community. Don't like be hoarding knowledge just because you want to be cool and want to be the only one that knows a certain thing, but always help your comrades out. I remember that my last year of undergrad, I I had read a text that had never been published in English from Marx. That it was um, his notebooks of the reading that he had been doing from Kovalevsky, who is a Russian anthropologist. And anyone else that would have had like the individualist capitalist mentality would have said, I don't want to share this information because it's not available in English. I know it because I read Spanish and I want to sort of capitalize from it. I think the first thing I did with it was like talk about it in a book club with all of us. So it's because collective growth, that's what we're working for, not so suspend the ego and learn how to work together and grow together, because um, you'll realize that you yourself will grow more when you're able to grow in community.
Yes, I agree, and that's a good segue. You talking about the Spanish piece that you read. Some advice for people maybe a little further along in their development. Read outside the West. Please read people from China, members of the Chinese Communist Party. Read Vijay Prashad, Indian Marxist historian. Read, what was I reading? We read a ton of Latin American intellectuals, obviously, with how closely we follow that. And then read like Pan-African thought and listen to that. Because the thing, people make this accusation that Marxism is Eurocentric, and they're like, oh, it's written by all these old white men. But, that was in the 1800s, sure. But now, on the cutting edge of Marxism is the East and the global South. And the West is lagging behind. And I was listening to this Pan-African theorist, and the way he was describing essentially Marxism and dialectics and materialism, and combined with the idea of making Africa into one giant super country with a state to defend from U.S. imperialism. There's so much to be learned from that. Not only the way in which he was describing dialectics and stuff. The dude was really, really smart. The Center for Pan-African Thought, I would recommend everyone go check that out. But also the idea that Africans recognize that they need a strong state in order to defend from imperialism, which is not a perspective you get in the US, which is why you probably see a lot of anarchism and anarcho-communism, because you learn your whole life that, the Soviet Union was evil and nothing good ever happened there. And the whole thing was just gulags. Everyone was in work camps the whole time. So then you read Marxism and you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, but I don't like the Soviet Union still. So I'm just going to become an anarcho-communist and not believe in using the government or the state apparatus at all. Whereas if you read anywhere around the world, anarcho-communism isn't that popular except for in the West. But if you look at like Africa, they're not naive because they recognize the need for a state apparatus because they've been getting showered with drone strikes for the last 50 years. And the CIA has murdered every single leader who's tried to bring their continent out of poverty. And their borders were drawn up by colonialism with no regard for the people who lived there. The entire nation was divided up in what's called the scramble for Africa, or the entire continent. So they recognize the need for a state because of their lived experience. And if you're not reading outside of the US to get the lived experience from people all around the world, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, and it's so valuable to enhance your perspective and increase your perspective by reading from people who have grown up in a different culture and with different material conditions than you. And not to say that we're going to necessarily apply everything that they do in the US, everything they do over there here in the US. Obviously, socialism has its own characteristics wherever it comes about, but there's so much to learn. And how do you know what we want to keep and what we don't without studying other countries and studying what they've done and studying their theorists? And it's, we don't talk about race a lot, we usually focus on class issues, but it's also sad that like people are watching my TikToks about Pan-Africanism because I'm a white dude who looks like a Trump supporter. Like, go listen and read to some Black and brown people and some people who don't look like you, please. So yeah, that's been huge for me, reading, Xi Jinping and Mao, and then on top of reading, Marx and Lenin, who were, Lenin Russian, Marx German, Engels German, and then you've been reading the history of American socialism too, which is something that's also hidden from us, which can also teach us a lot. So yeah, just look outside the West, and then especially look outside Western sources, because even like you said, Democracy Now! And Jacobin are like all right, but there are lies that become so heavily perpetrated in the West, like those outlets will pick them up and they'll run with them. The Western outlets, like Democracy Now! Was big on the Uyghur thing, before they looked into it and realized the only sources on the Uyghurs was Adrian Zenz, one of the authors of the Black Book of Communism, who said he's on a mission from God to destroy China. But that myth became so heavily perpetrated, and everybody who didn't accept that China was doing a genocide of Uyghurs was, dismissed as a lunatic, or a communist, a sycophant to authoritarian regimes, even though the story was BS. And you would only know the story is BS if you looked outside the US. You could be like, oh, every Islamic country said what China's doing is okay except for Turkey, and then all the Western countries said what China's doing is not okay. Like, oh, I wonder what this is about, but you're not even going to know that. You're not even going to know that the Organization of Islamic Countries launched a full investigation into Xinjiang, and they found nothing other than like schools, like vocational centers where they're giving people jobs, and they do like de-radicalize them, which you can argue whether that's okay or not, but it's not concentration camps. That was a laughable lie that was picked up by most of Western media other than the Gray Zone. Shout out to them for always seeming to pounce on the lies and not pick these things up.
Yeah, that's such an important point, dude, because I think it was the conference in either 2019 or 2018. I heard that the either the DSA conference or the Socialist conference or something like that, there was like two speakers that were just bashing Cuba and Venezuela. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? You call yourself a socialist, and like, what type of socialism do you want? Do you want a socialism that maintains the imperial order of the U.S. around the world, or do you want that to be overthrown as well? So it's the only way you can sort of figure that out is by reaching out to those perspectives and listening to the people that are over there, and doing so in a smart way. If you're listening to Venezuelan voices, but the Venezuelan voices that you're listening to are all a bunch of petty bourgeois white Venezuelan voices, you're going to get a different perspective than if you're listening to the Venezuelans that are in El Pueblo, the black and brown, usually more colored Venezuelans. So yeah, I think this is the basic framework of the Marxist lens. Interpret things materialistically, right? Don't take if you interpret, let's say, Venezuela from what is said about Venezuela in the U.S., that's an idealist approach. Marx says it very early on in German ideology. The project that we're doing is not one that treats things from the ideas to understand the material. It goes from the material to understand the ideas. I think he uses heaven for ideas. And if you're interpreting Venezuela from just the ideas and the op-eds that come out from the U.S., you're not treating it materialistically. You're not going to the source. You don't have to like travel to Venezuela necessarily, but at least listen to Venezuelan voices that are in these areas that we know are not directly funded by the CIA or don't have direct interest to American overthrowing of their own country. And with that materialist approach is being able to think of things historically. Think of why have these people come to these positions, right? So if you guys right now get inspired to start reading like Venezuela analysis or something like that, don't just read the stuff from now. Try to educate yourself on the history of how have things come to this, right? The best way to do that, and this is completely unbiased, is by reading Eddie's thesis that's on the website. It's like 28 pages, so it's not too long, but it's really good, and it does a really nice outline of Venezuelan development. And besides that, and recognize that things are contradictory. Don't be afraid of contradiction. The world moves by contradiction. So if you see that certain things don't add up, try to figure out why. And sometimes it just doesn't add up because certain things are contradictory. That's the way they are. So yeah, that's basically the Marxist lens.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, once you start looking at outside sources, or if you do a deep dive into a country, like we've done with Venezuela and China, the U.S. media narrative becomes such, like, it's so visibly pure propaganda and lies, and you can see it with your own eyes. So like my buddy who's getting his degree in political science and healthcare administration at UW-Madison will send me Venezuela articles from the New York Times, because we have this debate. I'm always telling him the New York Times is pure garbage, and he's like, they still publish good stuff, and he will still send me articles they publish that are decent or whatever, but he'll send me the Venezuela articles. He'll say, what's wrong with this? And I will go like line by line, just pure blatant lies. Like, I'm not talking like I have plenty of critiques of Maduro. I'm not mad at them because they take an oppositional stance to Maduro. Just pure nonsense, like playing up of Leopoldo Lopez and this other guy as a killer or as heroes. The U.S. media has been playing up this dude Leopoldo Lopez as a hero and a victim of the authoritarian Venezuelan government. The dude got caught in the 2000s plotting a coup attempt to kill the president, so they put him in jail. And then in 2016, 2017, there was all this mass outrage from the opposition party and from the Western media. Oh, this guy Leopoldo Lopez, let him go, let him go. Maduro lets him go, and then he does a coup attempt and tries to kill Maduro. So it's like the Western media is absurd. They have no idea what's going on in Venezuela. They have no actual reporters in Venezuela. And then you have people trying to tell you that you should never use Telesur as a source. It's like, yeah, I get Telesur state funded, and maybe they'll probably, I'm sure they'll be more lenient and a little biased in favor of the government, but at least they're there. At least they're in the country, and the U.S. media says complete fabricated nonsense. So like you have to look outside, even if it's something like Al Jazeera or Telesur that's state run, or RT, because you think, oh, they're state run, it must be propaganda. It's really not. It's, they have independent journalists who are actually in these countries. And if you look at like CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, they don't have journalists in these countries. And I can't remember what it was. MSNBC got caught, like they were going to someone in England for all their reporting on Syria. It's like they just go, there's no journalism going on here. It's pure blatant propaganda, and it'll become really apparent once you start looking at sources that are actually trying to do journalism. So yeah, that was kind of a long ramble, but.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, I definitely do agree, and that's the thing about taking a critical approach to everything. And one of the things that we have to realize is that I think in I was a philosophy major, and that's my field, but I think in political science, one of the things they try to teach you is objectivity. And in journalism, one of the things they try to teach you is objectivity. And you're never going to have an unbiased approach. That's the first thing we have to realize. Even the most numerically strict, just here's cold statistics. You always have to ask, why are those statistics the ones that you're showing me? Why are these not being showed? It's humans, the ones that are making, that are producing these works, and humans are creatures that are in an environment, and they're to some result the effects of their environment. So there's always going to be a biased approach, even if you're getting like in 100 years from now, all of the news comes from like computers or some shit like that. Who made the computers, right? There's where the bias is at. There's always going to be a bias, and I think it's more fair when you have a source like Telesur that explicitly it's a source that's from the government. Everyone knows what its bias is. Than a one of these bullshit Western sources that has humanitarian in their titles, and that talks about being, unbiased.
Human Rights Watch.
Human Rights Watch.
60% of the board CIA members and former defense secretaries.
Yeah.
They're the leading source on Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and the other thing is people are looking for an unbiased source, so they're looking something in the middle. And then when you're looking for something in the middle between the American Republican Party and the American Democratic Party, you have shitty ass neoliberalism. So that being in the middle, people are always looking for something that's in the middle. It's like, well, if you're in the middle of two pieces of shit, it's just a piece of shit. So yeah, people call, I've seen 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, whatever, in the TikTok comments are just dumb people calling me biased. It's like, yeah, I have a bias. I have a bias towards housing the homeless, feeding the hungry, and ending the wars, but I recognize those are my biases, and those are the things that I try and do, and those are the things that we try and report, as anti-imperialist stuff about changing the capitalist mode of production is something that works for the masses of society. So yeah, recognizing your own bias, and then unbiased, it doesn't exist. So I think we could probably wrap it up there then. We've gone for a little while. This is a fun video. Hope you guys enjoyed our tips for burgeoning young leftists on TikTok. Carlos, do you have any final words?
No, I enjoyed the chat, and we should do. I think if the people like it, more of these more relaxed videos where we're just getting stuff out of our minds instead of like having systematic. We could do those as well. We will, but these more chill videos would seem cool.
For sure. I agree. All right. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thanks for watching. Peace.
See you, everyone.